The sand was the color of dried blood in the Kandahar dawn. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Brennan pressed her cheek against the stock of her HK-416, feeling the familiar weight of the weapon. The heat already building in the Afghan morning, the taste of dust and cordite mixing on her tongue. 23 years old, first deployment, and her team leader was bleeding out 6 feet to her left. The ambush had come from 3 sides. Classic L-shaped formation. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing, knew American tactics, knew patrol routes, knew timing. The kind of knowledge that didn't come from luck or battlefield instinct. It came from someone on the inside feeding information to people who wanted Americans dead. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chen had taken the first burst. Center mass. Body armor stopped 2 rounds, but the third found the gap under his arm where the plates didn't cover. He was conscious, barely, making wet sounds when he breathed. The kind of sounds that meant minutes, not hours. 4 other SEALs pinned down with her. Peterson, Ramirez, O'Malley, Jackson. Good operators, well-trained, but training only took you so far when the enemy knew exactly where you'd be and exactly when you'd be there. When they had the high ground and you had nothing but a ditch and the quickly evaporating hope that someone would get to you before the ammunition ran out. Sarah counted her magazines. 3 left, 90 rounds. The math was simple and ugly. 40 insurgents in the buildings around them. Maybe more. QRF was 20 minutes out. They didn't have 20 minutes. Lieutenant Chen tried to speak. Blood bubbled at his lips. Sarah moved to him. Kept low. Rounds cracked overhead close enough to feel the displacement of air. Brennan, his voice was barely a whisper. You have to take command. Sir, the QRF is coming. Just hold on. No time. You know what to do. He grabbed her arm with surprising strength. Trust your training. Trust yourself. Get them home. Then his hand went slack and his eyes fixed on something beyond the smoke and dust and death. And Sarah Brennan became the ranking operator on a battlefield where rank meant nothing and only survival mattered. She didn't think. Thinking killed you in moments like this. She moved on instinct and training and something deeper, something that lived in warriors across all generations. The absolute refusal to let the people beside you die while you still drew breath. Peterson, Ramirez, suppressive fire on the northwest building. 3-round bursts, make them think twice. O'Malley, Jackson, with me. We're moving to that wall, 20 meters. On my mark. They looked at her, young faces streaked with dirt and fear, and the dawning realization that their team leader was dead and a woman barely older than them was now responsible for keeping them alive. For half a heartbeat, she saw doubt in their eyes. Then O'Malley nodded. Let's move. The wall was 20 meters away. Might as well have been 20 miles. But staying meant dying and moving meant a chance. And warriors didn't survive by taking the safe option. They survived by taking the option that led to survival, even if every instinct screamed against it. Go. They went. 3 figures sprinting across open ground, while Peterson and Ramirez poured fire into the buildings above. Sarah ran with her HK-416 up, scanning for threats, seeing movement in a second-story window, and firing without breaking stride. The figure dropped. They reached the wall. Cover. Concealment. A chance to breathe. Peterson, Ramirez, move now. They moved. More suppressive fire from Sarah's position. More rounds chewing into the walls around them, but none finding flesh. Peterson slid in beside her, breathing hard. Ramirez right behind him. Now they had an angle, a position, a way to control the battlefield instead of being controlled by it. Sarah assessed with the cold clarity that came when death stopped being a possibility and became a certainty you simply refused to accept. The insurgents were concentrated in 3 buildings. They had numbers, they had position, but they'd expected the Americans to die quickly, and when that didn't happen, their advantage started eroding. Surprise was gone. Initiative was shifting. Ramirez, you still have that grenade launcher? 2 rounds, Chief. Northwest building, 2nd floor, right window. That's where their commander is directing fire. Ramirez didn't question, didn't hesitate. He'd seen what Sarah saw, the way certain windows had more coordinated fire, the way some positions adjusted based on direction from that one location. He aimed, fired. The 40-millimeter grenade flew in a perfect arc and disappeared into the 2nd-story window. The explosion was everything they needed. Confusion, chaos, fire and smoke, and insurgents scrambling instead of shooting. Now we move. Fighting withdrawal to that compound. 200 meters. Bounding overwatch. I'll take point. Peterson, cover our 6. They moved like they had trained, like they'd been doing this for years instead of months. Like they were a team that knew each other's moves without speaking, because speaking wasted time and time was the only currency that mattered. Sarah led them back 200 meters to a compound that could be defended, got them inside, established a perimeter, called for the QRF with actual coordinates and actual tactical information instead of panicked radio calls. When the Blackhawks finally arrived and the shooting stopped and the dust settled, Lieutenant Commander Chen was still dead, but the 4 operators with Sarah were alive, bloodied, traumatized, but alive. That was the day Sarah Brennan earned her SEAL trident, not in training, not on the obstacle course at Coronado, but in the Kandahar sand with the blood of her team leader on her hands and the weight of command settling on shoulders that weren't supposed to be strong enough to bear it. That was 13 years ago. The memory faded as the Black Hawk descended toward the landing zone. Virginia, late October, the kind of autumn day that made you remember why you loved this country. Clear skies, crisp air, trees wearing their death in brilliant colors. Sarah had been back stateside for 3 weeks. After her last deployment, after Afghanistan finally ended, and all those years of fighting dissolved into failure and retreat, and the bitter knowledge that good people had died for a mission that politicians decided wasn't worth completing. She was 36 now, older than many SEALs got. The job aged you in ways that weren't always visible, joints that ached in cold weather, scars that told stories you couldn't share with anyone who hadn't lived them, eyes that had seen things civilians couldn't comprehend and wouldn't believe if you told them. And something else, something deeper. The kind of exhaustion that came from spending your entire adult life at war and wondering what the hell you were supposed to do when the war ended, but the enemy kept fighting. The Black Hawk touched down at a facility that didn't officially exist. No signs, no markings, just another anonymous building in the sprawl outside D.C., where the real decisions got made and the real operations got planned and the real warriors got sent to do the impossible, while politicians took credit or assigned blame depending on how things turned out. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes was waiting in the briefing room, mid-40s, Navy intelligence. The kind of officer who'd spent her career in the shadows making sure operators like Sarah had the information they needed to come home alive. They'd worked together before. Sarah trusted her as much as she trusted anyone in the intelligence apparatus, which was to say she trusted her to tell the truth when it mattered and lie when it didn't. Chief Brennan, good to see you. Commander, wish I could say the same, but you only call when something's gone sideways. Hayes smiled without humor. FOB Mongoose has a problem. She pulled up a map on the screen. Forward Operating Base Mongoose, Eastern Afghanistan. One of the last remaining American positions in a war that had officially ended, but continued in the gray spaces where Special Operations Forces still hunted targets and maintained presence, and tried to keep the Taliban from immediately overrunning everything the minute the last regular troops pulled out. 8 months of intelligence leaks, convoy routes compromised, patrol patterns known to the enemy, safe house locations burned, 17 Americans dead across multiple incidents. The pattern is clear. Someone on that base is feeding operational information to hostile networks. Sarah studied the map, the base, the surrounding terrain, the pattern of incidents marked in red. You've run internal investigations, CID, NCIS, counterintelligence teams. Nothing. Whoever's doing this is careful, disciplined, knows how to avoid detection. So you want me to find them? Hayes nodded. The problem with official investigations is everyone knows they're happening. People get careful, change patterns, go quiet. We need someone who can observe without being observed. Someone who has legitimate access to all areas of the base. Someone who can interact with everyone from privates to colonels without raising suspicion. Sarah leaned back in her chair. You want me to go undercover? Civilian contractor, food service management. You'll be assigned to audit the base mess hall operations. It gives you access to the entire base population multiple times per day. People talk freely around support staff. They forget they're being watched. You'll be invisible. I'm a SEAL operator, not a spy. You're whatever the mission requires. Hayes pulled up another image, a photograph. 6 men in combat gear, Sarah's old team. She recognized every face. 2 of those faces belonged to men who were dead now. Killed in an ambush in Iraq 3 years ago. An ambush that happened because Someone leaked their patrol route to an insurgent cell. Victor Martinez and Jason Cole died because of an intelligence leak. Different base, different leak, but the same result. Good men dead because someone sold information to the enemy. Hayes looked at Sarah directly. You're not doing this as a spy. You're doing this as an operator protecting her team. Every person on that base is your team now. The weight of those words settled like cold steel. Sarah looked at the photograph. Victor, Jason, brothers who trusted her to lead them and who died anyway because some bastard decided money or ideology or revenge was worth more than American lives. When do I leave? 48 hours. We'll build your cover, establish your credentials, brief you on the base personnel. You'll be deployed for as long as it takes to identify the leak and confirm evidence. Could be weeks, could be months. And when I identify them, you document everything. Build an airtight case. Then we bring them in through proper channels. This has to be legal, has to hold up in court. We're not in the execution business anymore. Sarah thought about Kandahar, about Lieutenant Chen bleeding out in the dirt, about the choice between doing things the right way and doing things the way that kept your people alive. Sometimes those were the same things, sometimes they weren't. Understood. Hayes handed her a folder. Your cover identity. Memorize it. Live it. You're Sarah Brennan, former Army Reserve Administrative Specialist, deployed to Kuwait in the late 2000s. Now you work for a Pentagon contractor doing operational efficiency assessments. You're there to evaluate mess hall operations and write a report no one will read. Boring, bureaucratic, invisible. Sarah opened the folder, started reading, started becoming someone else. It was something she'd done before, something every operator did. You put on a mask, played a role, became whatever the mission required. The hard part wasn't putting on the mask. The hard part was remembering who you were when you took it off. 2 days later, she was on a C-17 headed east. Military transport, uncomfortable web seating, the smell of fuel and metal and the particular stale air that came from recycled oxygen in a pressurized aluminum tube. A dozen other passengers, contractors, support personnel, a couple of junior enlisted heading to their first deployment. She watched them, young, nervous, trying not to show it. She'd been that young once, that nervous, that uncertain about what war actually meant beyond the recruiting commercials and the training exercises. Then the first firefight happened, and all the uncertainty burned away in the crucible of violence. And you either became a warrior or you didn't. There was no middle ground. The C-17 landed at Forward Mongoose in the gray pre-dawn. Cold, always colder than you expected Afghanistan to be. The mountains in the distance still had snow on the peaks even in October. The base was surrounded by HESCO barriers and wire, and the particular architectural aesthetic of American military installations built to be temporary, but somehow becoming permanent, because wars that were supposed to end never quite did. Sarah collected her bags, checked in with the duty officer, got her quarters assignment, played her role, just another contractor. Just another face in the endless rotation of people who came to combat zones to do support jobs and collect paychecks and go home to tell stories about being in a war without ever actually fighting in one. She'd been on base for 20 minutes when she met Sergeant Major Frank Mahoney. The mess hall was exactly what you'd expect. Industrial, institutional. The smell of food prepared in quantities large enough to feed 200 people 3 times a day. Stainless steel surfaces, commercial equipment, steam tables, serving lines, the eternal compromise between nutrition and cost effectiveness that defined military food service since Armies first figured out logistics. Frank Mahoney stood behind the serving counter like a general surveying a battlefield. Late 60s, lean and weathered in the way men got when they spent their youth in hard places doing hard things. His eyes were the tell, clear, alert, missing nothing. The kind of eyes that belonged to men who'd seen combat and never quite left it behind even when they came home. He wore a Vietnam Combat Infantryman badge on his cap, faded, well-worn, earned in a war that ended before Sarah was born, but still defined everything about the man who'd fought in it. Help you? His voice had the particular gravel that came from years of shouting orders in loud places. Sarah Brennan, Pentagon contractor. I'm here to audit mess hall operations. Frank studied her with an intensity that made Sarah want to check her 6 even though they were standing in a kitchen. Another one. Excuse me? Another Pentagon expert here to tell me how to run my operation. Had 3 of you last year, all had opinions. None had a clue. He turned back to his prep work, chopping vegetables with the kind of precise knife work that came from doing something 10,000 times. Your quarters in order? Yes, Sergeant Major. Just Frank. I'm retired. Do this job because someone has to, and I'm better at it than the kids they keep sending. He pointed the knife at a walk-in refrigerator. You want to audit? Start there. Inventory, food safety temps, rotation schedules, all logged, all proper. But you'll check anyway because that's what auditors do. Sarah approached the serving counter, watched him work. His hands move with economy. No wasted motion. The muscle memory of someone who'd been trained to be efficient and never lost the habit. You hold yourself like infantry. The knife stopped. Frank looked up. His eyes locked onto hers, and Sarah saw the calculation happening. Saw him reading her the way she'd been reading him. Posture, movement, the way she'd approached the counter with her weight balanced and her angles covered even in a kitchen where the only threat was bad food. You didn't get those eyes pushing paperwork in Kuwait. Sarah held his gaze. This was the moment, the choice. Stick to cover or trust instinct. Trust the read she was getting from a man who'd been doing this job since before she was born. Army Reserve, Administrative Specialist, deployed 2008 to 2009, Kuwait. The cover story came out smooth, practiced, believable. Frank studied her for another long moment, then nodded, went back to his prep work. Kuwait don't give you combat reflexes, but that's your business. Just don't get in my way while you're doing your audit. He didn't believe her, but he was respecting operational security, the unspoken code between warriors. You don't blow someone's cover even when you know it's cover. You play the game, you wait, you watch. And when the time comes to drop the pretense, you do it in a way that doesn't compromise the mission. Sarah spent the rest of that morning going through the motions, checking inventory logs, reviewing food safety documentation, asking questions that sounded official and meant nothing, playing her role, being invisible, just another contractor doing a job no one cared about. But she was watching, always watching, seeing who came into the mess hall, who talked to whom, who asked questions, who seemed too interested in things that shouldn't interest them, building the baseline, establishing normal. Because you couldn't identify abnormal until you knew what normal looked like. By lunch service, she had identified the key players. Captain James Reeves, base commander, early 40s, competent, careful. The kind of officer who took responsibility seriously and didn't pass blame down the chain. He ate alone, reviewed paperwork while he ate, didn't socialize. Staff Sergeant Victor Navarro, supply, mid-30s, smooth, charismatic. The kind of NCO who knew everyone and made it his business to know everything. He worked the mess hall like a politician, stopping at tables, chatting with personnel, always listening, always watching. Could be innocent networking, could be intelligence gathering. Master Sergeant Ray Tucker, motor pool, late 40s, quiet, professional, Afghanistan veteran based on the combat patch. He ate efficiently, didn't linger, didn't socialize beyond basic courtesy. The kind of senior NCO who'd been at war so long, he'd forgotten how to be at peace. Specialist Angela Wu, communications, mid-20s, bright, enthusiastic in the way people got when they hadn't been deployed long enough for the shine to wear off. She talked constantly, overshared on what Sarah suspected was probably social media. Security risk from naivety rather than malice. And others, dozens of others, each one a potential leak, each one someone who had access to information that could get people killed. The task felt impossible, finding one traitor among 200 personnel. A needle in a haystack, except the needle was covered in the same hay and looked exactly like every other piece of straw. Frank moved through the lunch service with quiet efficiency. He didn't chat, didn't smile, didn't waste energy on false friendliness. But Sarah noticed something. People respected him, enlisted respected him, officers respected him. There was something in the way they interacted with him. The deference, the slight acknowledgement, the recognition of a man who'd earned his place through decades of service. A young private came through the line, nervous, fresh-faced. Couldn't have been more than 19. He fumbled with his tray, dropped his fork, turned red with embarrassment. Frank handed him a new fork without comment, without judgment, just quiet competence doing a job that needed doing. "Thank you, Pops." Frank grunted, went back to serving, but Sarah saw the tiniest hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Pops. The kid called him Pops. That meant something. Meant Frank was more than just mess hall staff. He was a fixture, a constant, the kind of presence that became part of the base infrastructure even though he wasn't officially in the chain of command. That night, Sarah lay in her quarters reviewing her notes, building profiles, establishing timelines, looking for patterns in the noise. The intelligence leak had been happening for 8 months. That was a long time. Whoever was doing this had settled into a routine, had gotten comfortable, had stopped being as careful as they'd been in the beginning. That was when mistakes happened, when patterns emerged, when invisible things became visible if you knew how to look. A knock at her door, late, after 2,200 hours. Sarah's hand moved to the knife she kept within reach, even though she was supposed to be a civilian contractor who had no reason to expect threats. She opened the door. Frank Mahoney stood in the corridor. He didn't ask to come in, didn't explain his presence, just spoke in a voice pitched low enough not to carry. "You gonna tell me what you're really doing here?" Sarah made the calculation. Stick to cover or bring him in. Every instinct screamed to maintain operational security. But every instinct also said Frank Mahoney was someone you wanted on your side. Someone who'd been doing this job since Vietnam. Someone who saw things other people missed because he'd spent 50 years learning to see. If I was doing something other than auditing food service operations, I couldn't discuss it. If you were, hypothetically, Frank looked at her with those clear old eyes that missed nothing. I'd say I've been watching this base for 12 years. I know every soul who eats here. I know their habits, their problems, their secrets. I know who drinks too much, who's got money trouble, who's screwing around on their spouse. I know things people tell me without knowing they're telling me because they forget the old man in the kitchen is listening. And if someone was looking for an intelligence leak, I'd say that hypothetical person should start by watching the supply sergeant. Man asked too many questions about convoy schedules, and I'd say that person should also watch the base commander. Good officer, but his wife died last year. Medical bills bankrupted him. Man in that situation becomes vulnerable to certain kinds of pressure. Sarah processed this. 2 suspects, both with means and opportunity. Frank had just cut her investigation timeline by weeks. If I was investigating hypothetically, I'd appreciate that insight. If you were investigating hypothetically, I'd say you remind me of someone I knew in Vietnam. Best point man in the company. Saw things before they happened. Kept us alive more times than I can count. Until the day he didn't, because our CO was selling information to the VC and led him into an ambush. Frank's voice went flat. Cold. The kind of cold that came from old rage that time hadn't healed. I found out too late. 3 weeks too late. My friend died along with 11 other good men. I killed that CO myself, fragged him. Never told anyone till now. The words hung in the air between them. Confession. Warning. Promise. Why tell me this? Because I've been waiting 50 years to settle that score. Couldn't save my friend, but maybe I can save someone else's friend. If you're here to find a traitor, I'm here to help. If you're not, then we just had a conversation about food service operations and nothing else. Sarah looked at this old warrior standing in her doorway, saw the weight he carried, the guilt, the rage, the absolute refusal to let it happen again on his watch. She made a decision, the kind of decision that either saved missions or destroyed them. The kind you made with your gut because your head would talk you out of it. I could use help, but this stays between us. No one else can know. Frank nodded once. I've kept secrets for half a century. I can keep one more. When do we start? We already have. Tell me everything you know about Victor Navarro. They talked for an hour. Frank laid out observations made over months, patterns, anomalies, the kind of intelligence that came from patient watching rather than active investigation. Victor's questions about convoy routes, his interest in patrol schedules, his habit of being present when classified information was being discussed, even when he had no operational need to be there. But also doubts. Victor had lost a brother to American military action, drone strike, mistaken identity. That gave him motive, but it also gave him a reason to be bitter without being a traitor. Grief and betrayal looked similar from the outside. What about Tucker? Sarah asked. The motor pool sergeant. Frank considered. Ray Tucker's solid, did 3 tours in Afghanistan, lost men to IEDs. Came back different like everyone does. But he's not the leak. I'd stake my life on it. Why? Because I've seen men break. I've seen what it looks like when war turns a good soldier into something else. Ray Tucker isn't broken. He's tired. There's a difference. Sarah filed that assessment away. Frank's instincts about people carried weight. 50 years of watching, reading, understanding. That couldn't be replicated with databases and surveillance. I need to observe Victor without him knowing he's being observed. I need to see who he talks to, who he contacts off base, whether there's a pattern to when information leaks. You'll have your chance. Breakfast service, 0600 hours. I'll put you on the serving line. You'll see everyone. Everyone will see you. But they won't really see you. That's the trick with being invisible. You hide in plain sight. Frank left. Sarah sat alone in her quarters thinking about Kandahar, about Lieutenant Chen dying because someone leaked information, about Victor and Jason killed in Iraq for the same reason, about the 17 Americans dead at Forward Mongoose because a traitor walked among them serving breakfast or fixing vehicles or doing whatever job provided cover for selling souls. She thought about the choice she'd made bringing Frank into this operation. Hayes hadn't authorized it. Operational security dictated keeping the circle small. But warriors didn't survive by following rules. They survived by trusting the right people at the right time. Frank Mahoney was the right people. Sarah felt that certainty in her bones. The next morning, she reported to the mess hall at 0500. Frank was already there. Always first one in, last one out. That was his way. He showed her the industrial kitchen, the prep stations, the cooking equipment, the serving line, all of it delivered with the same gruff efficiency he showed everyone else. You'll work the line with me, eggs and bacon station, easy work, repetitive, gives you time to watch while you serve. Everyone comes through for breakfast. Officers, enlisted, support staff, you'll see them all. At a 600, the mess hall doors opened and personnel flooded in. Sarah took her position behind the serving counter, apron on, serving utensils in hand, playing the role of temporary contractor, helping with food service, invisible in the way support staff always were. The young private who dropped by his fork came through the line, still nervous, still fumbling slightly with his tray. Sarah scooped eggs onto his plate. He mumbled thanks, called Frank Pops again. Frank grunted acknowledgement. Who's the kid? Sarah asked quietly. Tommy Castellano, 19, first deployment. Dad was 82nd Airborne, killed in Mosul 7 years back. Kid's trying to follow in his footsteps. Got the heart, still working on the spine. Sarah watched Tommy find a table, sit alone, eat quickly like he was afraid someone would take his food. She saw herself in him. That first deployment fear, that desperate need to prove yourself worthy of the uniform, that weight of living up to a legacy you weren't sure you could carry. Victor Navarro came through next, all smiles and charm. Morning, Pops. Morning, ma'am. You're new. Contractor? Food service audit, Sarah said, kept it brief, professional, boring. Well, you're in good hands with Frank here. Man runs the best mess hall in theater. Only place where the food's actually edible. Victor winked, moved on, worked the room, stopped at 3 different tables, chatted, laughed, made himself visible and likable and part of the base social fabric. Captain Reeves came through later, quiet, distracted. He took his tray without really looking at what was on it, found a table in the corner, ate while reviewing paperwork, never looked up, never engaged with anyone. A man carrying weight that showed in his shoulders, in his eyes, in the deep lines around his mouth. Master Sergeant Tucker came through near the end of breakfast service. Efficient, polite, didn't waste time on small talk. Got his food and left. Professional to the core. Angela Wu bounced through like she was heading to a party instead of another day at war. Morning, Pops. Morning. Oh, you're new. I'm Angela. Communications. You'll love it here. Well, as much as you can love being in Afghanistan, which isn't much, but the people are great. Most of them. Some of them. Okay, like maybe 30%. But that's better than 0. Frank handed her a tray with extra bacon. Eat, talk less. Angela grinned, moved on, still talking. The breakfast service lasted 90 minutes. Sarah served eggs and bacon to 200 personnel. watched every face, noted every interaction, started building the map in her head of who connected to who had access to what, who might have means and motive and opportunity. After cleanup, Frank and Sarah found themselves alone in the kitchen. Steam from the industrial dishwashers filled the air, the smell of breakfast gradually fading, the quiet that came between meals when the mess hall became just another empty space instead of the social hub of the base. Your thoughts? Frank asked. Too early to tell. I need more time, more observation. Victor's friendly, but that could be natural personality. Reeves is isolated, but that could be grief. Tucker keeps to himself, but that could be professional distance. Angela overshares, but that seems like innocence rather than malice. Trust your gut. My gut says the answer's here. Somewhere in this building, in these interactions. I just can't see it yet. Frank nodded, started prep work for lunch. Sarah helped, chopping vegetables. The kind of mindless work that let your brain process in the background while your hands stayed busy. You asked about Tommy, Frank said after a while. The kid who calls me Pops. His father was 82nd Airborne. Tony Castellano, good man. We served together in the Gulf, Desert Storm, kept in touch after. When Tony deployed to Iraq, I told him to keep his head down, watch his sectors, trust his instincts. He did all that, still got killed because someone leaked patrol routes to an insurgent cell. IED took out his vehicle. He died instantly. Frank's knife work never slowed. Precise, mechanical. When Tommy showed up here 6 months ago, I made a promise to his old man. Keep the kid alive. Send him home to his mother in one piece. I intend to keep that promise. The weight of that statement settled between them. Promises made to the dead, the debts we carry, the obligations that transcend duty and rank and orders. Frank had been carrying this for 7 years. Waiting, watching, making sure Tommy Castellano didn't die the way his father had. We'll keep him alive, Sarah said. All of them. That's what this is about. That's what it's always about. Keeping the person next to you alive. Everything else is politics and paperwork. They worked in silence for a while. Two warriors separated by 40 years in a dozen wars, but united by the same fundamental truth. The mission was protecting your people. Everything else was secondary. That night, Sarah compiled her first report for Hayes. 3 days of observation. Initial profiles, suspect list, Frank's intelligence about Victor and Reeves, her own assessment that Tucker was probably clean and Angela was innocent. The kind of preliminary analysis that established a starting point without reaching conclusions. She sent the report through encrypted channels, received acknowledgement. No new orders, just continue the mission, observe, document, build the case. It was patient work, careful work, the kind that took weeks or months and ended with either answers or failure. But Sarah had learned patience in Kandahar, had learned that some battles were won by waiting, by watching, by refusing to rush when rushing meant mistakes. She could do patient, she could do careful, she could be invisible as long as necessary. Over the next 2 weeks, she settled into the routine. 0500 start time, breakfast prep and service. Cleanup, lunch prep and service. More cleanup, dinner prep and service. Final cleanup. Then back to her quarters to document observations and send reports and try to find patterns in the noise. Tommy Castellano continued calling Frank Pops and fumbling with his tray and trying too hard to fit in. Sarah watched him gradually relax, saw him start to make friends, saw the fear in his eyes diminish slightly as deployment stopped being terrifying unknown and became merely dangerous routine. Victor Navarro continued being charming and friendly and asking questions that might be innocent curiosity or might be intelligence gathering. Sarah watched him carefully, noted every conversation, every question about convoy schedules or patrol routes or classified operations, building a case, looking for the pattern. Captain Reeves continued eating alone and carrying weight that showed in every movement. One night, Sarah found him in the mess hall after hours, just sitting, staring at nothing. She approached carefully. Can't sleep either? He looked up, recognized her. Contractor, Sarah, right? Right. Sorry to intrude. I'll leave you to it. No, it's fine. Company's welcome. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. This was my wife's favorite place. Strange thing to say about a military mess hall, but she visited once, said it reminded her that I was doing something that mattered. Feeding warriors, taking care of people. She appreciated that. Sarah sat, let the silence stretch. Sometimes silence was better than words. She died a year ago, cancer. We fought it for 3 years. Fought hard. Bankrupted ourselves fighting it. Experimental treatments. Clinical trials. Everything the doctor said might work. None of it did. His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly. She made me promise I'd keep serving. Keep doing my duty. Not let her death break me. I'm trying to keep that promise. Some days are harder than others. I'm sorry for your loss. We all lose people. That's part of this life. You learn to carry it, learn to keep moving, or you don't and you break and you're no good to anyone. He stood. Thanks for listening. Not many people want to hear about the personal stuff. They want the commander, the officer, the guy who has it together. Sometimes it's nice to just be a man who lost his wife and isn't sure how to keep going without her. He left. Sarah sat alone in the empty mess hall thinking about grief and duty and the way those things intersected in warriors who'd promised to serve something bigger than themselves even when everything personal was falling apart. Reeves had motive, financial pressure, emotional vulnerability, everything that made someone susceptible to recruitment by hostile intelligence services. But he also had integrity, love for his wife that transcended death, a commitment to duty that held even when everything else was crumbling. That didn't mean he wasn't the leak, but it made Sarah doubt. She found Frank the next morning, told him about the conversation. Frank listened, nodded slowly. Man's carrying a heavy load, but that don't make him a traitor. Sometimes pain is just pain. Not every broken soul is trying to break others. So who's your money on? Still Victor. Something about him doesn't sit right. Too smooth, too friendly, too interested in things that don't concern supply sergeants. But I got no proof, just old instincts. Old instincts kept you alive in Vietnam. That counts for something. They were still talking when Master Sergeant Tucker walked into the kitchen. Early, before breakfast prep officially started. He stopped when he saw them. Studied Sarah with the same intensity Frank had used that first day. You're not food service. It wasn't a question. Sarah made the same calculation she'd made with Frank. Trust or cover, instinct or protocol. What makes you think that? Because I've been investigating the intelligence leaks for 6 weeks, and I know CID when I see it, even when they're pretending to be contractors. Tucker pulled up a chair, sat down. So we can dance around this, or we can work together. Your call. Sarah looked at Frank. Frank shrugged. Your mission, your call. NCIS, not CID, but close enough. Tucker nodded like this confirmed something he'd already known. I figured naval intelligence was involved. The leaks are too sophisticated for local investigation. Too careful. Whoever's doing this knows counterintelligence procedures, knows how to avoid digital footprints, knows operational security. You have a suspect? Victor Navarro, supply sergeant. Lost his brother to American drone strike. Has been in contact with Afghan insurgent networks for the past year. I've been tracking his communications, building evidence, but I needed confirmation before moving. Can't arrest a man without proof, even when you know he's dirty. Sarah processed this. Tucker had been running his own investigation parallel to hers. That complicated things, but it also confirmed her instincts about Victor. You should have reported this up the chain. I did. Captain Reeves told me to stand down. Said I didn't have enough evidence. Said I was seeing patterns that weren't there. That's when I knew. And knew what? That Reeves is either the leak himself or he's protecting Victor. Either way, the chain of command is compromised. That's why I've been working alone, building my case quietly, waiting for someone from outside to come in and validate what I've found. Frank spoke up. You think the captain's dirty? I think he's vulnerable. Wife died, medical debt, emotional trauma, classic recruitment target. Victor could have approached him, offered money, exploited his grief, turned him. Tucker pulled out a small notebook, flipped through pages. I've tracked 3 major intelligence leaks back to information that only Reeves had access to. Convoy schedules, patrol routes, safe house locations. Every leak corresponds to a meeting between Reeves and Victor. Sarah felt the pieces falling into place. Not just one traitor. 2, working together. Victor gathering information through his supply position and social networking. Reeves providing the high-level classified intelligence that only a base commander could access. Both covering for each other, both too careful to be caught by conventional investigation. We need proof, hard evidence, something that will hold up in military court. I've got communications intercepts, financial records showing payments to Victor's bank account from unknown sources, meeting logs, but nothing concrete enough to prove Reeves is involved. He's too careful, too smart, knows how investigations work. Frank stood, paced, thinking. Then we force his hand, make him think the investigation is closing in. Watch how he reacts. Guilty men panic. They make mistakes. We bait the trap and see who takes the bait. Sarah considered this. It was risky. Against protocol, the kind of operation that could blow up in their faces. But conventional approaches had failed for 8 months. Sometimes you had to take risks. What do you propose? Frank smiled, the kind of smile that belonged on battlefields rather than kitchens. We leak false intelligence. Announce we've identified the source. Arrest imminent. See who runs. See who panics. See who makes contact with their handlers to warn them the operation is compromised. It was bold, dangerous, exactly the kind of operation that either broke cases wide open or destroyed them completely. Sarah looked at Tucker. Tucker looked at Frank. 3 warriors from 3 different wars united by the same mission. Stop the leak, protect the troops, do what needed doing even when regulations said don't. When? Sarah asked. Tuesday lunch service, mess hall full, 200 witnesses. Captain Reeves makes the announcement. We watch Victor's reaction. We watch Reeves himself. We have Angela Wu monitoring communications for any encrypted bursts going out. We set the trap and see who walks into it. 3 days. That gave them 3 days to prepare, to position assets, to make sure when the trap was sprung, they'd capture evidence instead of just suspects. 3 days to get it right because they wouldn't get a second chance. Sarah sent an encrypted message to Hayes, explained the situation, Tucker's parallel investigation, the plan to force the traitor's hand, the risk and potential payoff. She expected pushback, expected orders to stand down and do this by the book. The response came back 6 hours later. 1 word. Approved. Sometimes the book was wrong. Sometimes you had to trust warriors in the field to know when conventional rules didn't apply. Hayes understood that. Sarah suspected Hayes had been in similar situations, had made similar calls. That was why she was willing to authorize operations that would give headquarters staff heart attacks. Tuesday morning arrived cold and clear. Sarah went through breakfast service on autopilot. Her mind was already on lunch, on the trap, on all the ways this could go wrong and the slim chance it might go right. Tommy Castellano came through the line, still nervous, still trying too hard. Morning, ma'am. Morning, Pops. Frank gave him extra bacon. Stay sharp today, kid. Things might get interesting. Tommy blinked. Sir? Just stay sharp. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The kid nodded, moved on. Sarah wondered if Frank should have said less, but she understood. If things went sideways and people started shooting, Tommy deserved a warning even if he didn't understand what he was being warned about. Victor came through, charming as always. Another beautiful day in paradise. How's the audit going? Fine, almost done. Good. We'll miss having you around. Pops has been less grumpy with you here, though that's a low bar to clear. Frank grunted. Victor laughed. The easy camaraderie of people who'd worked together long enough to develop rapport. If Victor was a traitor, he hit it perfectly. That was what made him dangerous. Captain Reeves came through last, looking worse than usual. Dark circles under his eyes, hands shaking slightly. He took his tray, didn't look at the food, moved to his usual corner table. A man carrying weight that was about to get infinitely heavier. By 11:45 hours, the mess hall was full. 200 personnel eating lunch, talking, laughing. The normal chaos of a military dining facility during peak hours. Sarah stood behind the serving counter, HK-416 hidden underneath. Field stripped, waterproof bag, ready for assembly in 4 seconds if this went kinetic. Frank beside her, calm, ready. A man who'd done this before. Tucker positioned near the exits, watching. Angela Wu in the communications room monitoring frequencies. Everyone in position, the trap set. Captain Reeves stood, walked to the front of the mess hall. The room gradually quieted. When the base commander wants attention, everyone gives it. I have an announcement. We've identified the source of our security leaks. Arrest is imminent. That's all I can say right now. as you were. The room erupted in whispers. Speculation. Sarah watched Victor. His face remained calm, almost too calm, the kind of calm that came from expecting this, from preparing for this. She watched Reeves. He was sweating, hand trembling as he walked back to his table. That could be nerves from making an announcement, or it could be the physical manifestation of a man who knew he'd just destroyed his own cover. Angela's voice crackled in Sarah's earpiece, hidden, concealed beneath her hair. Encrypted burst just went out. Source is Captain Reeves' office computer. High priority transmission. Someone just sent a warning. That was the confirmation. Reeves was the leak. But before Sarah could move, before anyone could react, the world exploded. The first mortar round hit the eastern perimeter. Sarah's training took over. The spoon she'd been holding clattered to the floor. Her hand moved toward the hidden HK-416. Her mind calculated trajectories and timing, and the terrible understanding that someone had just attacked the base during lunch service with 200 personnel exposed and vulnerable. The second explosion rocked closer. Frank's voice cut through the chaos. "Incoming! Everyone down!" The third explosion hit the mess hall's eastern wall. The blast was massive, close. Too close. The wall cracked. Windows shattered. Shrapnel tore through the room. Personnel screaming, running, diving for cover. Tommy Castellano went down. Blood spreading across his shoulder, shrapnel wounds. His eyes found Sarah's across the chaos. Wide. Terrified. The same eyes Lieutenant Chen had worn in Kandahar 13 years ago when death came unexpected and violent. Sarah made her choice. The same choice she'd made in Afghanistan. The same choice warriors had been making since the first human picked up a weapon to defend the tribe. Cover didn't matter. The mission didn't matter. Procedure didn't matter. Keeping her people alive was the only thing that mattered. She tore off her contractor clothes, grabbed the HK-416, reassembled in 4 seconds. Her sealed trident visible now on her chest. No more hiding, no more pretending. She was Chief Petty Officer Sarah Brennan, Naval Special Warfare, and her watch had just begun. The fourth mortar round hit while Sarah was still processing the third. Training took over where thought ended. Her hands moved through weapon assembly with muscle memory older than conscious decision. Magazine inserted. Charging handle racked. Selector switched to fire. 4 seconds from concealment to combat ready. The HK-416 felt right in her hands. Familiar weight, known tool, the extension of will that every warrior understood. A rifle wasn't just a weapon, it was the difference between protecting your people and watching them die. Tommy Castellano was on the ground 10 feet away. Shrapnel wounds across his shoulder and neck. Blood spreading dark against his uniform. His eyes wide with shock and pain, and the terrible understanding that war had stopped being an abstract concept and become a visceral reality. Sarah grabbed him by his body armor, hauled him behind the serving counter where stainless steel equipment provided some protection from the continuing bombardment. The kid was heavy with dead weight and fear. She dropped him next to Frank, who was already moving with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this before. "Press this against the wound, hard. You're not dying today." Tommy's hands shook as he took the compress Frank handed him. "What's happening?" "We're under attack. Stay down. Do what you're told. You'll live." Frank's voice carried absolute certainty, the kind of certainty that young soldiers needed when chaos was erasing everything they thought they knew about the world. Sarah rose, surveyed the mess hall, 200 personnel in various states of panic, some diving for cover, some frozen in place, some running for exits without thinking about whether exits led to safety or more danger. Chaos, the enemy of survival, the thing that killed more soldiers than bullets. Her voice cut through the screaming. Command voice, the one they taught you at Buds, the one that carried over explosions and fear and made people stop thinking and start obeying. Everyone on the floor, away from the windows, wounded to the center. Able-bodied personnel moved to defensive positions. Some responded immediately, training overriding panic. Others stared at her, at the HK-416, at the sealed trident now visible on her chest where contractor clothes had been seconds ago. Captain Reeves pushed through the case, his face pale, blood on his uniform from someone else's wounds. "Who the hell are you?" Sarah met his eyes, saw calculation there, saw fear, saw the desperate scrambling of a man whose carefully constructed lives were collapsing around him. "Chief Petty Officer Sarah Brennan, Naval Special Warfare. I've been investigating intelligence leaks on this base for 3 weeks. She raised her rifle slightly, not quite pointing at him, but close enough. And right now, I'm assuming tactical command of this position because someone just attacked during lunch service, and I'm betting you know why. Reeves' hand moved towards his sidearm, subtle, almost unconscious. The movement of a man considering violence as a solution to a problem that was rapidly spiraling beyond control. Master Sergeant Tucker appeared at Sarah's shoulder, his own M4 carbine raised and ready. I wouldn't, sir. We've been tracking you for 6 weeks. We know about the encrypted transmission that went out 2 minutes before the first mortar hit. We know about your communications with Victor Navarro. We know you're compromised. The color drained from Reeves' face. For a moment, Sarah thought he might fight, might force them to kill him in front of 200 witnesses. Then his shoulders sagged, his hand moved away from his weapon. The fight went out of him all at once. You don't understand, they have my daughter. The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah had considered many possibilities. Greed, ideology, revenge. But a hostage situation changed everything. Changed the nature of betrayal from choice to coercion. Changed Reeves from traitor to victim, even as his actions got people killed. Your daughter died 3 months ago? Victor Navarro's voice came from behind them, calm, almost amused. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but the people I work for don't keep hostages alive. They use the threat and then eliminate the leverage. Your daughter was dead 2 weeks after they took her. Reeves spun, his face transformed by rage and grief and the terrible understanding that he'd betrayed everything for a lie. No, they said if I cooperated, they promised. They lied, that's what they do. Victor had his rifle up now, pointed at Reeves, at Sarah, at the room full of personnel who were starting to understand that the real threat wasn't outside the wire. It was standing among them wearing an American uniform. I've been feeding intelligence for 2 years. Your captain here only started 3 months ago. You were getting too close to me, so I needed a patsy, someone to take the fall. Reeves was perfect. Grief, debt, vulnerability, easy to manipulate. Sarah's rifle tracked to Victor. Clean sight picture. Center mass. 2 pounds of pressure on a 5-pound trigger. But 200 personnel between her and the target. Too many angles, too much risk of collateral damage. You won't shoot, Victor said. Too many civilians in the line of fire. You're a SEAL. You follow rules of engagement. You don't risk innocent lives. He started backing toward the kitchen, toward the rear exit. My employers are outside with 60 contractors, well-trained, well-equipped, here to eliminate everyone in this building because you got too close. The mortars were just the beginning. We can protect you, Sarah said. Testify. Help us take down your network. You don't have to die today. Victor smiled. The kind of smile that belonged to men who'd already made peace with death or decided other people's deaths were worth whatever they were being paid. I'm not dying today, Chief. You are. All of you. This whole base. It's already done. I planted C4 throughout this building over the past month. 5 pounds in the support beams, another 10 in the kitchen. Enough to bring this whole structure down. I have the detonator. If your friends outside don't kill you, I will. He fired 3 rounds into the ceiling. Personnel screamed. Dove for cover. In the chaos, Victor reached the kitchen door and disappeared. Sarah made the calculation. Chase Victor and leave the mess hall defenseless. Or organize the defense and let Victor escape. Both options were bad, but one kept more people alive. Tucker, take 5 men, find Victor. Stop him, I don't care how. Tucker nodded, grabbed the nearest armed personnel, disappeared after Victor. Sarah turned back to the mess hall, to the 200 faces looking at her with fear and confusion, and the desperate hope that someone knew what they were doing because no one else had a clue. Listen to me, we are under coordinated attack. Mortar bombardment plus ground assault. The enemy knows this base, knows our weak points, knows timing. They're coming to kill everyone here, but we can defend this position if we work together. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Silence. The kind of terrible silence that came when people were deciding whether to follow a stranger or collapse into panic. Frank's voice broke it. You heard the chief. She's a damn SEAL. Navy's best. She knows what she's doing. I'm following her orders and so should you. Anyone got a problem with that? The old warrior's endorsement carried weight. People looked at Frank, at his Vietnam CIB, at the absolute certainty in his eyes. If a combat veteran who'd survived the worst war of their generation was following this woman, Maybe she knew what she was doing. Movement, personnel rising, looking to Sarah for direction, waiting for orders that would either save them or get them killed, but at least gave them something to do besides wait to die. All right, here's how this works. Anyone with combat arms training, grab a weapon and move to defensive positions. Everyone else helps with wounded and ammunition distribution. We hold this position for 20 minutes until QRF arrives. 20 minutes. We can do 20 minutes. The mess hall transformed from chaos into purpose. Personnel moving, organizing, following the direction of someone who spoke with the authority that came from having done this before, from knowing what worked and what didn't when the world was exploding around you. Sarah moved through the crowd, identifying personnel, assigning tasks, building a defensive structure from whatever human material was available. You, motor pool mechanic, what's your name? Private Chen, ma'am. You know how to shoot? Qualified marksman, ma'am. Western wall. Find a firing position. Don't engage until you have a clear target and I give the word. Make every round count because ammunition is going to be a problem. Yes, ma'am. She moved to the next group. 3 support staff. Food service. No combat training visible in their eyes, but capable hands in the kind of steady calm that some people found under pressure. You 3, triage station in the kitchen. Organize the wounded by priority. Critical cases first. Anyone who can still fight gets patched and sent back. Anyone who can't gets kept comfortable. Clear? Yes, ma'am. More personnel. More assignments. Building the defense 1 person at a time. Creating order from chaos through the simple expedient of giving frightened people tasks that mattered and confidence that someone knew what they were doing. Specialist Angela Wu appeared at her elbow, young, scared, but holding together. Ma'am, QRF reports they're 25 minutes out. They were on exercise 15 clicks west. They're mounting up now, but it's going to take time. Can you monitor enemy communications? Their frequencies are encrypted, but I can track transmission patterns. See when there are coordinating movements. Do it. I need advance warning of attacks. Anything you can give me. Angela nodded, disappeared toward the communications equipment. A massive explosion rocked the northern wall, bigger than in the mortars. RPG or recoilless rifle. Something designed to punch through barriers and create breaches. Sarah moved to the impact point, saw the damage. A hole 3 feet across, daylight visible through it. The kind of opening that turned defensive positions into kill zones if the enemy exploited it properly. I need 5 rifles on this breach. Now, anyone tries to come through, you put them down. Overlapping fields of fire. No gaps. Personnel moved to comply. Found positions. Established the kind of interlocking coverage that made breaches expensive to exploit. Not perfect, not what you'd get with trained infantry, but good enough to make the enemy think twice about rushing through an opening where Americans were waiting. Sarah moved to the western wall, looked through a broken window, saw movement 300 meters out. Personnel and tactical gear moving with professional spacing and coordination. Not insurgents, not Taliban. These were contractors, private military operators, well-trained, well-equipped, the kind of enemies who knew American tactics because they'd been trained in American tactics. 60 of them, according to Victor, against 200 defenders. But most of those defenders were support personnel with minimal combat training. Against professionals, numbers alone wouldn't save them. They needed leadership, tactics, the kind of aggressive defense that made attackers pay for every meter they advanced. Frank appeared beside her. He'd found an M4 carbine somewhere. Old hands comfortable on familiar furniture. A warrior returned to his natural element. 60 contractors, professional assault, well-coordinated. Sarah assessed the tactical situation with cold clarity. They'll hit us in waves, test our defenses, identify weak points, then concentrate forces and punch through. So we hit them first. Frank's voice carried the flat certainty of experience. Before they organize, before they're ready, aggressive defense. Make them react to us instead of us reacting to them. Sarah looked at the old warrior, saw Vietnam in his eyes, saw decades of carrying the weight of men who died because someone wasn't aggressive enough when aggression was what the situation required. You're retired. I'm breathing. That means I'm in the fight. Frank checked his rifle with movements that belonged to muscle memory older than conscious thought. I've been preparing for this for 50 years, waiting for a chance to do it right. I'm not sitting this one out. There was no arguing with that. Some men were born warriors and stayed warriors until their last breath. Frank Mahoney was one of those men, had been one of those men since 1969 when he came home from Vietnam carrying guilt and rage and the absolute refusal to let it happen again. Western Wall, watch for flanking movements. They'll try to hit us from multiple angles. Call out threats. I trust your eyes. Frank moved to position without another word. Sarah continued her circuit, checking positions, adjusting fields of fire, ensuring everyone understood their sector and their responsibility, building confidence through presence and the simple demonstration that someone was in control even when control was an illusion maintained through will and training. The first rifle shots cracked from the western perimeter. Incoming fire, probing, testing responses. The enemy trying to gauge what they were up against before committing to a full assault. Sarah keyed her radio, borrowed from base communications. All positions, hold fire. Do not reveal your positions until we have targets worth engaging. Let them wonder what we've got. The shooting continued, rounds impacting against the mess hall's exterior, some finding windows, most hitting concrete and sandbags and the kind of fortified architecture that made military installations harder to crack than they looked from the outside. Then the shooting stopped. Silence. The kind of terrible anticipatory silence that came before storms and attacks and all the moments when violence was gathering itself for release. Angela's voice crackled over the radio. Ma'am, enemy communication spike. Multiple units coordinating. I think they're about to assault. All positions stand by. SJMI, wait for my command. Sarah moved to the western wall, raised her HK-416, acquired targets through her optics. Enemy personnel moving forward in coordinated bounds, using cover, advancing with the kind of professional competence that made them dangerous. She identified the assault leader, the one directing movement, carrying a radio, making hand signals, the nerve center of the attack. Take him down and the assault would falter while they reorganized. 300 meters, wind negligible, clear sight picture. Sarah's breathing slowed, her heartbeat steadied. The world narrowed to the reticle and the target in the space between them that a bullet would cross in less than a second. She fired. The assault leader dropped. His radio went silent mid-transmission. The effect on the attacking force was immediate. Confusion, hesitation, fighters looking for direction that wasn't coming anymore. Sarah shifted targets, second in command trying to rally the assault. Double tap, center mass. He went down. The rally attempt collapsed. All positions engage targets of opportunity. Make them pay for every meter. The mess hall erupted with gunfire. Not the precision shooting Sarah was delivering, but volume of fire that made the enemy seek cover and think twice about advancing. The assault stalled, bogged down by accurate fire from defenders who weren't supposed to be capable of mounting organized resistance. But the enemy adapted. That was what professionals did. They called for support, heavy weapons, suppressive fire that would force defenders to keep their heads down while assault elements advanced. A technical vehicle appeared from behind a building, pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, 50 caliber, the kind of weapon that could tear through the mess hall's walls and turn cover into concealment that offered illusion rather than protection. Sarah tracked the vehicle, 200 meters. Moving, driver and gunner visible. The gunner was traversing his weapon toward the mess hall. 5 seconds until he had firing position. 3 seconds until defenders started dying. She led the target, compensated for movement, fired a controlled burst at the driver's position. The technical swerved violently, crashed into a barrier. The gunner tried to recover, tried to bring his weapon to bear. Sarah put 3 rounds center mass. The gunner collapsed across his weapon. The technical was neutralized before firing a single shot. Good shooting. Frank's voice beside her. Calm, approving. The way veterans acknowledge competence without wasting words on unnecessary praise. You taught me well. I didn't teach you anything. You already knew. I just reminded you what warriors look like. More incoming fire. The enemy regrouping, concentrating forces. Sarah could see the pattern developing. They'd hit the northern breach again. Try to exploit the opening before defenders could reinforce it. Standard assault tactics. Effective if executed properly. Northern breach. Reinforcements now. They're coming through. Personnel responded. Moving to the breach. Establishing overlapping fields of fire. Sarah moved with them. Got there just as the first enemy fighters tried to enter. Close quarters battle. The kind of fighting that happened at distances measured in feet rather than meters, where speed and aggression mattered more than marksmanship, where hesitation meant death and action meant survival, even if the action wasn't perfect. Sarah's HK-416 spoke with controlled bursts. First fighter through the breach dropped. Second fell trying to enter. Third died before crossing the threshold. The breach became a kill zone, a place where attackers died and defenders held position through simple refusal to yield ground. But they kept coming, wave after wave. Professionals who knew that breaches had to be exploited regardless of cost. That defensive positions fell when attackers were willing to pay the price in blood. Sarah burned through a magazine, reloaded, continued engaging. Beside her, other defenders were firing, some with training, some with raw courage, all of them holding because retreat meant death and standing meant a chance. Her rifle ran dry. Last magazine, 30 rounds between her and hand-to-hand combat. She dropped the empty mag, loaded the last one, made the calculation, 60 enemy fighters, unknown number down, unknown number still combat effective, 25 minutes until QRF, resources dwindling, ammunition critical, the math getting worse with every passing second. A young corporal appeared beside her, sliding magazines across the floor. "Ma'am, scavenge from the arms room, 5.56 should fit your weapon." Sarah grabbed them, not her preferred ammunition load, but compatible with the HK-416. "Good work. Distribute the rest. Anyone running low gets resupplied." The corporal moved off. Sarah reloaded with fresh magazines. The weight was comforting. Ammunition meant options, meant the ability to continue fighting instead of being reduced to throwing rocks or harsh language. The assault on the northern breach faltered. Too many casualties. The enemy pulling back to regroup. Sarah used the respite to check the rest of the defensive perimeter. Western wall holding, eastern approaches covered, southern exit secure. They'd survived the first wave, but there would be others. Professional attackers didn't quit after one failure. They adapted and tried again. Captain Reeves was sitting against a wall, his hands zip-tied behind his back. A private standing guard over him, the captain's face showed nothing. No anger, no fear. Just the empty exhaustion of a man who'd lost everything and was waiting for the final bill to come due. Sarah knelt beside him. "Your encrypted transmission. Who did it go to?" "Coordination cell, 20 clicks north. They relay information to operational commanders." His voice was mechanical, dead. "I sent coordinates, told them the investigation was closing in, that they needed to act fast if they wanted to eliminate evidence." "How many attacks have you enabled?" "I don't know. Dozens?" "I gave them convoy routes, patrol schedules, safe house locations. Every time they took my information and used it to kill Americans." He looked at Sarah with eyes that held nothing but self-loathing. "I told myself it was to save my daughter, that if I kept cooperating, they'd keep her alive. But I knew, deep down I knew she was already dead. I just couldn't admit it because admitting it meant I'd sold my soul for nothing." "You'll face military justice for this." "I know. I'll plead guilty. Take whatever punishment they give. It won't be enough. Nothing could be enough for what I've done." Sarah stood. She felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just the tired recognition that betrayal came in many forms, and sometimes the worst betrayals came from good people, broken by circumstances they couldn't control. Reeves was guilty, would be punished, but understanding his reasons didn't make the punishment feel like justice. It just made it feel necessary. Gunfire erupted from the eastern wall, a new assault, the enemy probing different sectors, looking for weak points, finding them and exploiting them with professional ruthlessness. Sarah sprinted to the eastern position, saw the situation developing. 15 fighters trying to flank through terrain that provided cover from the main defensive positions. If they got close enough, they could throw grenades, could engage from angles that bypassed established fields of fire. 5 rifles to eastern wall. Suppress that flanking movement. She established position, began engaging the flankers. Her HK-416 had started the battle with 30 rounds. She'd burned through 5 magazines engaging targets, was on her 6th, running calculations. Ammunition expenditure versus targets remaining versus time until reinforcement. The math was unforgiving. The flanking attempt broke, pulled back, but that was 3 assaults blunted, The enemy was learning, adapting. Next attack would incorporate lessons learned, would come harder, would find the weakness that every defense had because perfect defenses didn't exist when the enemy was professional and determined. Tommy Castellano appeared at her elbow, his shoulder bandaged, his face pale with blood loss and pain, but his eyes clear, determined, a rifle in his hands that looked too big for his young frame. "Ma'am, I can fight. You're wounded. I can still pull a trigger. You need every rifle. I'm not sitting in the back while everyone else fights." Sarah saw his father in him, saw Tony Castellano, who died in Iraq when intelligence leaks sent him into an ambush, saw the legacy of warriors who refused to quit even when quitting was the smart option. "Eastern sector, cover our flank. Anyone comes through your zone, you put them down." Tommy moved to position. Sarah watched him go, thought about all the young warriors who died because old men made bad decisions. Thought about the cycle of violence that turned boys into soldiers, and soldiers into casualties, and casualties into memories that haunted the survivors. Frank was suddenly beside her. Kids shouldn't be fighting. Kid's a soldier. Soldiers fight. Kid's 19, barely old enough to vote. Definitely too young to die for someone else's mistakes. We're all too young to die for someone else's mistakes. That's what war is. Sarah checked her ammunition. 3 magazines left. How much longer until QRF? Frank checked his watch. 15 minutes. If they make good time, if the enemy hasn't set ambushes on the approach routes, if everything goes according to plan. When does anything go according to plan? Never. That's why we improvise. Frank pointed to the breach in the northern wall. They'll hit that again, probably with more force, probably with the intent to break through regardless of casualties. We need to make that breach more expensive. Suggestions? Booby traps, improvised obstacles, anything that slows them down and channels them into kill zones. Kitchens full of materials, gas canisters, cooking oil, flammables that become weapons if you're creative. Sarah smiled despite everything. "You're a devious old bastard. I'm a survivor. There's a difference." Frank moved toward the kitchen. "Give me 5 minutes. I'll make that breach a nightmare to exploit." He disappeared. Sarah used the respite to redistribute ammunition, move defenders to better positions, check on wounded, make sure everyone understood their sector and their responsibilities. Leadership during combat wasn't about grand tactics. It was about small adjustments, constant presence, the demonstration that someone was watching and adapting and refusing to accept defeat. Angela Wu appeared. "Ma'am, enemy communications are going crazy. Multiple units reporting. They're frustrated, taking more casualties than expected. Their commander is demanding results." "Good. Frustrated enemies make mistakes. Desperate enemies take risks. We want them angry and careless." "There's something else. Their commander keeps referencing a timeline, says they need to finish this before external assets arrive. I think they're worried about our QRF." That made sense. Professional contractors knew how to assault fixed positions, but they also knew their window of opportunity was limited. Once American reinforcements arrived with air support and heavy weapons, this fight would shift dramatically. They needed to finish this fast, which meant the next assault would be their maximum effort. "All positions. Enemy is about to throw everything at us. This is their last push. We hold for 10 more minutes and we win. 10 minutes. That's all we need. 10 minutes. 600 seconds. An eternity when people were shooting at you. A heartbeat when you were trying to keep 200 personnel alive against 60 professional killers who'd been paid to leave no survivors." Frank returned from the kitchen. His hands showed burns. His face showed satisfaction. "Northern breach is ready. First 3 fighters through are going to have a very bad day. After that, the fire will give us time to engage anyone else trying to follow." "What did you rig?" "Cooking oil, gas canisters, positioned to create a fuel-air explosion when ignited. Won't kill everyone, but it'll slow them down and probably convince them the breach isn't worth exploiting." That's not standard military doctrine. Standard doctrine gets people killed. Improvisation keeps them alive. Frank checked his M4. "I did this in Vietnam, 40 different ways to turn household materials into weapons." War teaches you creativity when you run out of ammunition and options. The enemy attacked. All sectors simultaneously. Western wall, northern breach, eastern flank, southern approaches. Everything at once. Maximum pressure designed to overwhelm defenders through sheer volume of violence. Sarah made instantaneous calculations. Where to be, where to direct forces, where the defense would hold and where it would break if not reinforced. She chose the northern breach. That was where Frank's trap waited, where the enemy would concentrate forces expecting to exploit previous success. She reached the breach seconds before the assault hit, positioned herself, acquired targets. The first enemy fighter came through. She let him enter, let him commit, then fired. He dropped. The second fighter followed. She engaged. He fell. The third entered. Frank triggered his trap. The explosion was everything he'd promised. Fire and pressure and screaming. The breach became an inferno. Fighters caught in the kill zone died instantly or worse than instantly. Those behind them scrambled back. The assault broke against Frank's improvised defenses. But the western wall was getting hit hard. Sustained fire, suppression that forced defenders to keep their heads down. Sarah could hear the difference in the shooting, could hear her people starting to break, starting to understand they were outnumbered and outgunned and that courage alone wouldn't save them. She sprinted to the western position, saw the situation, defenders pinned, enemy advancing under covering fire, 60 meters out, 50, getting close enough to throw grenades or rush the position in a final assault that would carry them inside the mess hall. Sarah took position at a broken window, started engaging, controlled bursts, target identification, shoot, shift, shoot again, the kind of precise fire that came from years of training and dozens of deployments. Every round found a target, every target went down. The enemy advance stalled, but her ammunition was critical. 2 magazines left, 60 rounds. Against an unknown number of enemies still combat effective. The math wasn't working anymore. The resources weren't there. She was going to run dry, and then it would come down to knives and fists and whether QRF arrived before the position collapsed. Then she heard it, the most beautiful sound in the world, the distinctive rotor beat of Black Hawk helicopters inbound at speed. QRF inbound, 5 minutes, hold your positions. We're almost there. The effect on defenders was immediate. Morale shifted, backs straightened, firing became more aggressive. People who'd been considering surrender or flight suddenly remembered they were Americans, and Americans didn't quit when reinforcements were coming. The effect on attackers was equally immediate. They heard the helicopters too, knew what it meant, knew their window was closing. The assault intensified, became desperate. Last chance to achieve objectives before overwhelming force arrived and turned hunters into hunted. Sarah burned through her second-to-last magazine. 30 rounds into targets at distances ranging from 20 to 80 meters. Every shot mattered. Every target eliminated was one less threat to the people depending on her to keep them alive. Her rifle ran dry. Last magazine. She loaded it with hands that had done this thousands of times, muscle memory that functioned independent of conscious thought. The kind of automatic competence that separated professionals from amateurs. 20 rounds into the magazine when Victor Navarro's voice echoed through the mess hall, amplified, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Chief Brennan, I'm in the kitchen. I have the detonator. I'm looking at 15 pounds of C4 that will bring this entire structure down. You can keep fighting. You can kill my contractors. But in 30 seconds, I'm going to push this button and everyone in this building dies. You, old man Frank, that kid Tommy, everyone. Unless. Sarah held her fire, calculated, evaluated, tried to determine if Victor was bluffing or if he'd actually rigged the building to explode. Unless what? Unless you surrender. Put down your weapons. Walk out that door. My employers want you alive. Want to know what you learned, who you told, how much damage you did to their network. Surrender and everyone else lives. Refuse and everyone dies. 30 seconds. Make your choice. Frank appeared beside Sarah, his face grim. He's not bluffing. I saw him working in the kitchen over the past month. Installing equipment. Didn't think much of it. Maintenance, upgrades. But if he was placing explosives. We can't surrender. I know. They'll kill everyone anyway. I know that too. Sarah made the hardest calculation of her career. Fight and possibly trigger Victor to detonate. Killing everyone instantly. Or surrender and buy time. Hope that Tucker found Victor. Hope that QRF arrived before Victor's employers could evacuate. Hope that somehow this ended with fewer casualties than the alternative. There was no good choice. Just the choice that kept the most people alive the longest. All positions cease fire. Lay down your weapons. The order went against every instinct. against everything she'd been trained to do. But sometimes leadership meant making impossible choices, meant accepting responsibility for outcomes that were going to be terrible regardless of what you chose. The shooting stopped. Silence descended, terrible and complete. 200 personnel looking at her with confusion and fear and the beginning of understanding that they just lost. Victor's voice again. Smart choice. Now walk out. Single file. Hands where we can see them. Anyone tries anything and I push the button. Personnel started moving. Toward the exits. Hands raised. Weapons left behind. Walking into captivity or execution with nothing but hope that somehow this ended differently than it looked like it would end. Sarah was the last one out. She passed through the doorway, saw the contractors waiting, weapons raised, professional security cordon. They weren't going to execute everyone immediately. They wanted prisoners, wanted information. That meant time. Not much, but some. The last person cleared the mess hall. Sarah stood in the open, waiting for Victor to show himself or detonate or do whatever came next in a situation that had spiraled completely beyond control. Then Tucker's voice came over her radio. Quiet, controlled. Chief, I have Victor. He's dead. The detonator was a bluff. No C4. He was buying time for evacuation. Relief flooded through Sarah. Brief, immediately replaced by tactical assessment. They'd surrendered, disarmed, walked into a trap. Now they needed to fight their way back out before the contractors realized the detonator threat was gone. But 60 armed contractors surrounded 200 unarmed personnel. The math was impossible. Until the helicopters crested the ridgeline and door gunners opened fire. 7.62 millimeter machine guns raking the contractor positions. Devastating. Overwhelming. The kind of firepower that turned combat into massacre when one side had heavy weapons and the other side was caught in the open. Contractors scattered. Some returned fire. Some ran. Some died where they stood because door gunners from helicopters with thermal optics and unlimited ammunition didn't miss. Sarah grabbed the nearest rifle, dropped by a contractor who'd been cut down by helicopter fire. Everyone grab weapons. Get back inside. Move now. Personnel responded. Training and survival instinct overriding confusion. They grabbed weapons, returned to the mess hall, established defensive positions. The situation shifted again. Predators becoming prey as American air power and ground reinforcements arrived in overwhelming force. The Blackhawks landed, infantry dismounted, fresh troops with full ammunition loads, and the kind of aggressive confidence that came from arriving to reinforce beleaguered defenders. The QRF spread out, engaged remaining contractors, pursued those trying to flee. The battle shifted from desperate defense to mop-up operations. Sarah lowered her rifle. Let the exhaustion hit. Let the adrenaline crash land like it always did when the shooting stopped and you realized you were still alive. She'd led for 37 minutes, from the first mortar to the final shot. 37 minutes that felt like hours and seconds simultaneously. Frank walked up beside her, blood on his face from a cut above his eye. His rifle held with the casual competence of someone who'd been carrying one for 50 years. We held, Sarah agreed. 0 KA, 0 KIA. The best possible outcome. Everyone who'd been alive when the mortar started was still alive now. Wounded, traumatized, but alive. Tommy Castellano was sitting against a wall, medics working on his shoulder wound. He saw Sarah, managed a weak smile. We won, right? We won. Pop said you'd keep us alive. He was right. Frank walked over to Tommy, knelt down despite protesting knees, put his hand on the kid's good shoulder. You did good today. Your father would be proud. Tommy's eyes filled with tears, relief, pain, pride, all mixed together in the emotional cocktail that came after combat when you realized you'd survived and become something different than what you'd been before the shooting started. The QRF commander approached. Major Williams, competent, professional, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. Chief Brennan, Master Sergeant Tucker briefed me on the situation. Intelligence leak, insider threat, coordinated assault. He looked at the defended mess hall, at the 200 personnel who'd held against professional contractors. You commanded this defense? Yes, sir. With support personnel and minimal combat arms? Yes, sir. Against 60 contractors? Approximately. Williams shook his head. That shouldn't have been possible. It was possible because they refused to quit, Sarah said, because Sergeant Major Mahoney trained them and led them and showed them what warriors look like. I just provided tactical direction. Williams looked at Frank, saw the Vietnam CIB, saw the old warrior who'd been fighting wars since before Williams was born. You're retired. I was, Frank said. Then someone attacked my mess hall during lunch service. Retirement ended right there. Williams smiled. I'll need full after-action reports from both of you, but first let's get your wounded evacuated and your prisoners secured. He paused. Captain Reeves is in custody? Zip-tied against the western wall, under guard. And Victor Navarro? Dead. Master Sergeant Tucker killed him attempting to escape. Williams nodded. We'll need to secure the base. Sweep for additional threats. NCIS will want to interview everyone. This is going to be a long night. Sarah looked at the mess hall, at the defended position that had held through impossible odds, at the people who'd discovered they were capable of more than they'd believed, at Frank, who'd waited 50 years for redemption and found it feeding warriors and leading them when violence came calling. Long night, as she agreed, but we're still here to see it. The sun was setting, painting the Afghan sky in colors that would have been beautiful if you weren't standing in the aftermath of battle. Sarah watched Tommy being loaded onto a medevac helicopter, watched other wounded being treated and evacuated, watched the careful documentation of evidence and bodies and all the bureaucratic necessities that followed combat. Frank stood beside her, silent, watching the same thing, carrying the same weight, the weight of command, of responsibility, of keeping people alive through combination of training and luck and absolute refusal to accept any other outcome. You saved them, Sarah said. We saved them. Together. Frank looked at her with those clear old eyes. You're a hell of an operator, Chief. You're a hell of a soldier, Frank. I'm 68 years old, too old for this. You just held off 60 contractors with mess hall personnel. Frank smiled. Fine, too old for easy operations. This was actually kind of fun, in a terrifying, life-threatening way. Sarah laughed. The kind of laugh that came after combat when inappropriate humor was the only way to process what you'd survived. Fun, that's one way to describe it. They stood together in the Afghan sunset, two warriors separated by generations but united by the same fundamental truth. That when violence came, you stood your ground, you protected your people. You did what needed doing regardless of cost or consequence. The war wasn't over, the threats hadn't ended, but today they'd won. Today everyone went home. Today was enough. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new threats, new impossible situations that required ordinary people to become warriors. But that was tomorrow. Tonight they'd earned the right to stand in the aftermath and acknowledge they'd done something that shouldn't have been possible. They'd held, against overwhelming odds, against professional killers, against mathematics and tactics and every reason to fail. They'd held because warriors across all generations shared one trait, the absolute refusal to quit while breath remained and people needed protecting. That was what it meant to stand watch. And the watch never ended. The Afghan night settled cold and absolute. Sarah Brennan sat on the hood of a Humvee, watching medevac helicopters ferry wounded to Bagram. Red Cross markings visible against the darkness. Running lights blinking like stars that had fallen to earth and learned to fly. Each helicopter carried men and women who'd survived something they shouldn't have survived. Who'd fought when they weren't supposed to be fighters. Who'd held when holding should have been impossible. 14 wounded, 3 critical. Tommy Castellano stable but facing surgery to remove shrapnel embedded near his subclavian artery. 2 others with compound fractures from the RPG blast. The rest with various degrees of trauma that would leave scars physical and otherwise. 0 killed in action. That number sat in Sarah's chest like a weight and a blessing simultaneously. She'd commanded defensive operations before. Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen. Places where Americans fought enemies who wanted them dead. Every operation ended with casualty counts. Every count included deaths. Warriors who trusted her leadership and paid for that trust with their lives. But not today. Today, everyone who'd been breathing when the mortars started was still breathing now. Wounded, changed, but alive. Master Sergeant Tucker approached. His uniform showed the battle. Torn fabric, blood that wasn't all his. The exhaustion that came from 37 minutes of continuous combat followed by hours of securing the aftermath. Chief, NCIS wants your statement. Commander Hayes flew in from Bagram. She's setting up in the Tiok. Sarah slid off the Humvee. Her body protested. Adrenaline had masked the accumulated damage. Now it was presenting the bill. Bruises from being thrown by explosions, lacerations from flying debris, the deep muscular fatigue that came from sustaining combat alertness for extended periods. She'd fought harder battles, sustained worse injuries, but she'd never felt older than she did right now. The Tactical Operations Center was organized chaos, personnel processing evidence, documenting casualties, coordinating with higher headquarters. The military machine converting violence into paperwork, making sense of chaos through systematic documentation. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes stood at the center, still wearing her travel uniform. She'd come fast, probably left Bagram within minutes of getting the first reports. Her face showed the strain of an intelligence officer whose operation had gone kinetic in ways that weren't supposed to happen. "Chief Brennan, glad you're alive." "Glad I am too, ma'am." Hayes gestured to a corner that offered some privacy. They sat. Hayes pulled out a digital recorder. Official statements for official records. The beginning of the process that would turn today's battle into court-martial evidence, and after-action lessons in all the bureaucratic transformation that followed when classified operations became public disasters. "Tell me what happened." "Everything. Start from when the mortars hit." Sarah talked. Systematic recollection. The reveal. The defense organization. Victor's betrayal. Reeves' confession. The battle. The surrender. Tucker killing Victor. QRF arrival. She kept it factual. Professional. The kind of statement that would survive legal scrutiny and command review. Hayes listened without interrupting. Took notes. Let Sarah's words fill the recorder with evidence that would be analyzed by people who hadn't been there and wouldn't understand what it felt like to make impossible choices under impossible circumstances. When Sarah finished, Hayes turned off the recorder, sat back. The professional mask slipped slightly. "You were supposed to identify the leak, document evidence, build a case for military justice. Instead, you commanded a defensive operation using mess hall personnel against professional contractors. The situation developed beyond initial parameters." "That's one way to put it." Hayes almost smiled. "Another way is you improvised brilliantly, kept 200 personnel alive, neutralized an insider threat, broke up an intelligence network that's been operating for 2 years. The kind of outcome that gets people promoted or court-martialed depending on who's writing the report." "Which one am I getting?" "Neither. You followed rules of engagement, made tactically sound decisions, achieved mission success. The fact that it got messy doesn't change the result." Hayes pulled out another file. "Victor Navarro is dead. Master Sergeant Tucker's shooting was clean. Self-defense. Victor was armed and attempting to flee. Tucker stopped him. No issues there." "And Captain Reeves?" Hayes' expression hardened. "That's more complicated. He's guilty of treason, providing classified information to hostile forces, enabling attacks that killed 17 Americans. The evidence is overwhelming. He'll face general court-martial, likely spending the rest of his life at Leavenworth." "He was coerced. They had his daughter." "Had, past tense. She died 3 months ago. Reeves knew or should have known. He continued providing information anyway. The law doesn't care about coercion when you keep betraying your country after the coercion ends." Hayes closed the file. "He'll have a chance to present his defense, explain his motivations. The panel will decide his fate, but the outcome isn't in doubt. He's finished." Sarah thought about Reeves sitting alone in that mess hall, eating while reviewing paperwork, carrying the weight of his wife's death and his daughter's kidnapping, and the terrible choices he'd made, trying to save someone who was already beyond saving. Guilt didn't mean innocence. Understanding didn't mean forgiveness, but it meant something. What about the network? Victor was a middleman. Someone was running him. Someone took his intelligence and used it to plan attacks. "We're working that. NSA is tracing communications. CIA is running down financial links. JSOC has targets developing. This doesn't end with Victor and Reeves, but it starts there. You gave us the thread. We'll pull it until the whole thing unravels." Hayes stood. "You'll need to stay on base for 72 hours. More interviews. Depositions. The kind of bureaucratic aftermath that's worse than the actual fighting. After that, you're getting 30 days leave, not optional. You've been deployed for 3 months of a classified operation that turned into a combat action. You need time to decompress." "What about Frank, Sergeant Major Mahoney?" "What about him?" "He's retired, civilian employee. He organized the defense while I was handling tactical positions, improvised weapons, trained personnel. Without him, we'd have lost that position in the first 10 minutes. Hayes considered this. Retired personnel aren't supposed to engage in combat operations. But I'm told he was already on site, already armed, already in a position where defending himself and others was necessary. Self-defense is legal regardless of retirement status. He deserves recognition. He'll get it, Bronze Star at minimum. Maybe more depending on how the Army wants to handle a Vietnam veteran who came out of retirement to save 200 personnel. Hayes moved toward the door. Get some rest, Chief. We'll talk more tomorrow. Sarah left the Tioki, walked through the base in darkness. The evidence of battle was everywhere. Bullet holes in walls, blood stains on concrete, the particular smell that came after combat when cordite and blood and fear mixed into something you could taste. She found Frank at the mess hall. He was cleaning, mopping blood off floors, wiping down surfaces, putting the kitchen back together with the same methodical attention he'd shown prepping meals. Like violence was just another mess that needed addressing before normal operations could resume. You should be resting. Frank didn't look up from his mopping. Can't sleep in a dirty kitchen, never could. Learned that in the Army. You want things right, you do them right, even when you're exhausted. Especially then. Sarah grabbed another mop, started helping. They worked in silence for a while. Two warriors cleaning up after battle the way warriors had been cleaning up after battles since armies first learned that somebody had to deal with the aftermath. Commander Hayes says you're getting a Bronze Star. Don't want a medal. You earned it. I earned a lot of things over the years. Didn't always get them. Sometimes got things I didn't earn. Medals are just metal. What matters is the people who went home alive. Frank finished mopping his section, moved to the next area. His movements were automatic, efficient. 50 years of institutional memory expressed through how he held a mop and cleaned a floor. You know what bothers me about today? Frank said after a while. It's that I waited 50 years. 50 goddamn years carrying guilt about what happened in Vietnam. About not stopping my CO when I knew he was selling information. About waiting until it was too late. I killed him after my friend died. But killing him didn't bring my friend back. Didn't undo the mistake. He stopped mopping. Looked at Sarah with those clear old eyes that had seen too much and remembered all of it. Today I got a second chance. Got to do it right. Got to stop the traitors before they killed anyone. Got to save the kid. Tony Castellano's boy. Kept my promise to his father. That's what I've been waiting for. A chance to prove I learned from my mistakes. That I wouldn't freeze next time. Wouldn't wait. Wouldn't let good people die because I was following chain of command instead of my conscience. You saved them, Frank. All of them. We saved them. Together, you, me, Tucker, that kid Tommy who refused to quit even with shrapnel in his shoulder. We saved them because we decided that's what mattered. Not rank, not regulations, not procedure, just keeping our people alive. Frank resumed mopping. That's what the watch means. Being willing to stand when standing costs everything. Being willing to fight when fighting means sacrificing yourself. Being willing to die so others can live. Sarah understood. She'd understood since Kandahar 13 years ago when Lieutenant Chen gave her command with his last breath. The watch wasn't a shift, wasn't a duty roster. It was a commitment, a promise. The absolute refusal to let your people die while you still drew breath. They finished cleaning in silence. Put the mess hall back together, made it ready for tomorrow's breakfast service because breakfast still needed serving, and warriors still needed feeding, and life continued even after battles ended. Sarah went to her quarters, tried to sleep, failed. The adrenaline was gone, but the memories remained. Every decision, every shot, every moment when someone could have died but didn't because of luck or training or divine intervention. Combat was like that. You survived and then spent hours or days or years replaying it, looking for the moments when different choices would have led to different outcomes. At 0300, she gave up on sleep, walked through the base, found herself at the motor pool where Tucker was inspecting vehicles for battle damage. The man never stopped, never rested, just kept working because work was better than thinking, and thinking led to places veterans didn't want to go. Can't sleep either? She asked. Tucker looked up from a Humvee with bullet holes through the door panel. Sleep's for people who don't have ghosts. I've got plenty of ghosts. They're not interested in letting me rest. How many deployments? 7? Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, all the places Americans fight wars they don't call wars. Tucker ran his hand over the bullet holes. Lost men in every deployment. Good men. Better than me. They're the ones who should have made it home. Instead, I'm here and they're in Arlington. That's the math that doesn't work. The equation that never balances. Sarah understood that too. Survivor's guilt. The weight every combat veteran carried. The knowledge that you lived and others died and there was no reason beyond random chance. No justice. No cosmic balance. Just violence and chaos and the arbitrary nature of who breathed and who didn't when bullets started flying. You saved lives today. That counts for something. Does it? Or did I just delay the inevitable? Those contractors we killed, they're dead. But the network that hired them is still operating, still planning, still recruiting. We cut off one head and 3 more grow back. That's how this war works. That's why it never ends. Tucker closed the Humvee door, moved to the next vehicle, continued his inspection with mechanical precision. Reeves is facing court-martial. Victor's dead. We broke their operation on this base. That has to mean something. It means 18 Americans are alive instead of dead. For now, until the next attack, until the next leak, until the next time someone decides their personal problems matter more than the oaths they swore. Tucker's voice was flat, empty. The voice of a man who'd seen too much and lost faith that anything they did actually mattered. We're putting fingers in a dam that's already broken. Pretending we're holding back the flood when all we're doing is delaying it. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that their actions mattered, that every life saved was a victory regardless of what came next. But she'd been at war for 13 years, had seen the same cycle repeat, the same fights, the same casualties, the same grinding attrition that made you wonder if winning was even possible or if the best you could hope for was not losing too badly. Go get some sleep, Tucker. That's an order. Yes, ma'am. He wouldn't sleep. She knew that. He'd keep working until exhaustion forced unconsciousness. That was how veterans survived. By staying busy, by focusing on tasks, by avoiding the quiet moments when ghosts came calling and memories became more vivid than present reality. Morning came cold and gray. Sarah reported for more interviews, more depositions, the systematic documentation that turned combat into evidence. She gave the same statement 3 times to 3 different investigators, each one looking for inconsistencies, each one trying to find the truth in a situation where truth was complicated and simple answers didn't exist. By afternoon, she was done, cleared to move freely on base. No charges pending, no investigation into her actions. Official assessment was justified use of force in defense of personnel under attack. The kind of clean conclusion that rarely happened, but did this time because the facts were clear and the outcomes were defensible. She found Tommy Castellano in the base medical facility. He was awake, sitting up, his shoulder bandaged and immobilized, his face pale but his eyes clear. The surgery had been successful, the shrapnel was out, the damage was repairable. He'd recover fully with time and physical therapy. Hey, ma'am, how you feeling, Private? Like I got hit by shrapnel, which I did, so I guess that's accurate. Tommy tried to smile. It came out weak but genuine. Docs say I'll be fine, full recovery, back to duty in 6 weeks. You fought well yesterday. I was terrified, thought I was gonna die. Thought we were all gonna die. Tommy looked at his bandaged shoulder, then Pop showed me his booby trap and I realized we had a chance. Because if a 68-year-old man was willing to fight, I didn't have any excuse to quit. Frank's special. Frank's a legend. You know what he told me? Before the attack, he said my dad would be proud, that I was living up to the legacy. Tommy's voice cracked slightly. My dad died in an ambush, intel leak, just like what almost happened here. Frank saved me from that, kept his promise to my father. That means everything. Sarah sat in the chair beside the bed. What are you going to do when you recover? Stay combat arms? Request reassignment? Tommy was quiet for a moment, thinking, processing, making decisions about a future that had seemed abstract until violence made it concrete. I'm going to stay in the Army, but I'm not going combat arms. I'm going to be like Frank. Support services, feed the warriors, take care of them, make sure they have what they need. He looked at Sarah directly. You can fight wars with guns, but you win them by taking care of the people doing the fighting. That's what Frank taught me. That's what I want to do. Pride swelled in Sarah's chest, not for herself, for Frank, for the legacy he was passing to a new generation. For the kid who'd learned that courage came in many forms, and sometimes the most important warriors were the ones who never fired a shot. Your father would be proud. Frank is proud. I'm proud. Thank you, ma'am, for everything, for leading us, for keeping us alive, for showing me what real leadership looks like. Sarah left the medical facility carrying Tommy's words like a gift. Soldiers rarely express gratitude. It wasn't part of the culture. You did your job. Others did theirs. Everyone moved forward without dwelling on who saved whom. But sometimes the words came anyway. And when they did, they mattered more than medals or commendations or official recognition. She found Frank in his quarters, a small room barely larger than a closet. Bed, locker, desk. The minimalist existence of someone who'd learned in war that possessions were burdens, and the only things worth carrying were memories and promises. Tommy's going to be okay, Sarah said from the doorway. I know. Checked on him this morning. Kid's got steel in him, like his father. Frank was packing, folding uniforms with military precision, organizing belongings with the same attention to detail. He showed everything. Army's giving me 30 days leave, mandatory. Said I need to decompress, as if 3 decades wasn't enough decompression from Vietnam. Where will you go? Montana. Got a cabin there. Bought it when I retired the first time, before I took this job. Place is quiet, peaceful. Everything war isn't. Frank continued packing. You know what's strange? I thought I was done fighting. Thought Vietnam was my last war. Then I spent 12 years feeding warriors and watching them deploy and wondering if I was doing enough. Yesterday I found out I was doing exactly enough, that being here mattered, that serving food was serving my country just as much as pulling triggers. He stopped packing, sat on the bed, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. I'm not coming back after leave. I'm retiring for real this time. Let someone younger run the mess hall. Someone who doesn't have 50 years of ghosts following them around. Someone who can do the job without carrying all the weight I carry. Sarah felt the loss immediately. Frank had become something more than a colleague, more than an asset. He'd become a friend, a mentor, a bridge to a generation that understood war in ways her generation was still learning. The Army needs you. The Army needs warriors. I'm a warrior, but I'm also old and tired and done carrying this weight. I kept my promise to Tony Castellano. Kept his son alive. That was my last mission. I can leave now knowing I did what I came here to do. What will you do in Montana? Frank smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Fish, hunt, sit on my porch and watch the mountains. Maybe write some letters to young soldiers who need to hear from old soldiers. Maybe teach some classes at the VA about military history. Maybe just exist without constantly waiting for the next attack. That'd be nice. Existing without waiting for violence. You saved 200 lives, Frank. That matters. I know it matters. That's why I can leave. Because I finally did what I should have done 50 years ago. I stood up. I fought back. I refused to let good people die because I was following orders instead of my conscience. He stood, resumed packing. You're a hell of an operator, Chief Brennan. Best I've seen. You're going to do great things. Just remember what I told you. Take care of your people. That's what separates good leaders from great ones. Not tactics, not strategy, not mission success. Taking care of the people who trust you to lead them. Sarah helped him pack, carried his bags to the transport vehicle that would take him to Bagram, and then on a Freedom Bird back to the United States, back to Montana, back to a life that didn't involve mortars and betrayal and the constant vigilance that defined existence in combat zones. They shook hands at the vehicle, warriors acknowledging warriors, generations separated by 40 years, but united by the same fundamental commitment: to serve, to protect, to stand watch when others couldn't or wouldn't. Thank you, Frank, for everything. Thank you for giving an old man a chance to get it right, to prove he learned from his mistakes, to save the kid instead of burying him. Frank climbed into the vehicle. Take care of yourself, Chief. The war's not over, probably never will be. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting. It just means we fight smarter. We fight for the right reasons. We fight because people are depending on us. The vehicle pulled away. Sarah watched it disappear toward the base exit, watched Frank Mahoney leave the war for the last time. A warrior who'd spent 50 years carrying guilt and had finally found redemption in a mess hall under attack during lunch service. She felt the weight of his absence immediately, felt the hole his departure left in the base infrastructure, but she also felt satisfaction, pride, the knowledge that some stories ended well, that some warriors got to go home having accomplished what they'd set out to do, that redemption was possible even after decades of carrying failure. The next 48 hours passed in bureaucratic tedium. More interviews, more paperwork. The systematic processing of an incident that had involved classified operations and combat casualties and insider threats. The kind of event that generated enough documentation to fill filing cabinets and keep lawyers employed for years. Captain James Reeves was formally charged with treason, conspiracy, providing material support to enemy forces. 16 counts of negligent homicide for the deaths his leaked information had enabled. His court-martial was scheduled for 60 days out. He'd be held in the Bagram detention facility until then. No bail, no liberty, just waiting for the legal process to run its course and determine how much of his life he'd spend in military prison. Sarah visited him once. The detention facility was sterile, cold, designed to hold prisoners rather than rehabilitate them. Reeves sat in an interview room wearing orange prisoner coveralls, his hands cuffed, his face showing the physical manifestation of guilt and regret, and the knowledge that his life as he'd known it was over. "Why are you here?" he asked. "I don't know, maybe to understand, maybe to see if you had anything else to say." Reeves was quiet for a long moment. "I loved my wife, more than anything. When she got sick, I would have done anything to save her. Spent every dollar, mortgaged our future. Didn't matter. She died anyway. Then they took my daughter, said they'd kill her if I didn't cooperate. I knew it was wrong, knew I was betraying everything I'd sworn to protect. But she was my daughter, my only child. I couldn't let her die. She was already dead. I know that now, but I didn't know it then. Or maybe I did and couldn't admit it because admitting it meant I'd betrayed my country for nothing, that I'd enabled attacks that killed 17 Americans to save a daughter who was already beyond saving." Reeves looked at his cuffed hands. "I deserve everything that's coming. Life in prison, dishonor, being remembered as a traitor. I deserve all of it. But I want you to know I didn't start as a traitor. I started as a father trying to save his daughter. The betrayal came after, when I kept going even after I knew the truth." Sarah had no response to that. No words that would make the situation better or clearer or less tragic. Reeves had made choices. Those choices had consequences. Understanding the choices didn't erase the consequences. It just made them more human, more complicated, more reflective of the terrible decisions war forced on people who weren't prepared for them. "I hope you find peace," she said finally. "I don't know if that's possible after what you've done, but I hope you find it anyway." She left, didn't look back. Some stories didn't have happy endings. Some people made choices they couldn't recover from. That was war. That was life. That was the weight everyone carried who'd seen what humans were capable of doing to each other when circumstances pushed them hard enough. 72 hours after the battle, Sarah was cleared to leave Forward Operating Base Mongoose. Mandatory leave. 30 days back in the United States. Time to decompress and process and pretend she was capable of existing in a world where mortars didn't fall and betrayal didn't end with combat. She flew out on a C-17, uncomfortable web seats in the particular discomfort of military transport. But she was going home, away from Afghanistan, away from the war that had defined her adult life, away from the constant vigilance that came from existing in a place where violence was always one decision away. The flight took 18 hours with refueling stops. Sarah slept poorly, combat memories mixing with dreams, her brain processing trauma the way brains did when conscious control was relaxed. She woke multiple times thinking she heard mortars, reached for weapons that weren't there. The adjustment from combat to peace was never smooth, never easy. It took weeks or months for your nervous system to recalibrate, to accept that not every loud noise was incoming fire, that not every stranger was a threat, that sometimes safety was real rather than illusion. She landed at Dover Air Force Base, Delaware, United States, home in the technical sense, even if home didn't feel like home anymore, when you'd spent 13 years deployed to places where home was a tent or a shipping container or whatever space you could claim as your own between missions. Lieutenant Commander Hayes met her at base operations, still in uniform, still looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Intelligence officers didn't like public spaces, didn't like exposure, preferred the shadows where they could watch without being watched. Chief Brennan, welcome home. Doesn't feel like home anymore, ma'am. It never does. That's the bite. Hayes handed her a folder. Your leave paperwork. 30 days. Report to Naval Special Warfare Command on day 31. We'll debrief fully then. Review lessons learned. Determine next assignment. What about the network? Victor's handlers? That's ongoing. We've identified 3 coordination cells. 2 in Pakistan, 1 in Afghanistan. JSOC is developing targets. When we move, it'll be decisive. But that's not your concern right now. Your concern is decompressing, processing what happened, taking care of yourself so you can take care of others when you return to duty. Hayes looked at her with something approaching concern. You did good work, Sarah. Really good work. You saved 200 lives, broke up an intelligence network, proved that operators can adapt to any mission parameters. That matters. Don't lose sight of that. And Frank, Sergeant Major Mahoney, recommended for Bronze Star with Valor device. Army's processing it now. Should be approved within 60 days. He'll get his medal. He'll get recognition. Then he'll disappear to Montana and we'll never see him again because that's what warriors like him do. They fight, they win, they go home. They don't stick around for the bureaucratic aftermath. Sarah understood. Frank had earned his exit, had paid his dues over 5 decades. Deserved peace if peace was possible for men who'd seen what he'd seen and done what he'd done. She spent her leave in Virginia, a small apartment near Naval Special Warfare Command that served as temporary housing for operators between deployments. It was anonymous, sterile, the kind of place that existed to store bodies rather than provide homes. But it was quiet, safe, free from the constant threat assessment that defined life in combat zones. She tried to decompress, tried to exist as a civilian, went to grocery stores and coffee shops and all the normal spaces Americans occupied without thinking about sight lines and escape routes and who might be carrying weapons. It didn't work. She couldn't turn off the vigilance, couldn't stop scanning crowds for threats, couldn't relax when relaxation meant dropping guard, and dropping guard meant vulnerability. On day 15, she received a letter, physical mail, increasingly rare in an age of email and instant communication. The return address was Montana, Frank Mahoney's cabin. She opened it. Inside was a single page, handwritten, the kind of careful penmanship that belonged to men educated before computers made handwriting obsolete. Chief Brennan, I'm settled in Montana now. The cabin is everything I remembered. Quiet, peaceful, no mortars, no betrayals, just mountains and sky and the kind of silence that lets you hear yourself think. I'm doing okay, better than okay. For the first time in 50 years, I'm sleeping through the night. No nightmares, no ghosts, just rest, real rest. The kind that comes when you have finished what you started and can finally let it go. I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance to get it right, for trusting an old warrior when you didn't have to, for leading with courage and competence and the kind of selfless commitment that makes people willing to follow you into hell. You're going to do great things, Sarah. I know it. I've seen enough warriors to recognize greatness when it stands in front of me. Just remember what I told you. Take care of your people. Everything else is secondary. The kid is going to be fine. Tommy, I got a letter from him yesterday. He's recovering well. Made his decision to go support services. Says he wants to be like me. I'm not sure that's aspirational, but I'm proud anyway. That's legacy. That's what matters. Not medals or recognition or official history, but knowing that what you taught actually mattered to someone, that they listened, that they'll carry it forward to the next generation. Take care of yourself, Chief. The war continues. But you can't fight forever. Nobody can. Eventually, you have to step back and let younger warriors take the watch. Trust them to do what needs doing. Have faith that the training holds, even when you're not there to enforce it. That's the hardest part of command, letting go, trusting others to carry the mission forward without you. I'm learning that now, slowly, with difficulty, but learning. Fair winds and following seas, Chief. Frank Mahoney, Sergeant Major, United States Army, retired. Sarah read the letter 3 times, folded it carefully, put it in her locker with the other things she'd collected over 13 years of war, challenge coins from units she'd served with, photographs of warriors she'd fought beside, letters from families thanking her for bringing their sons and daughters home, the accumulated weight of service expressed through paper and metal. On day 23, she received another letter, this one from Tommy Castellano, also handwritten, also from someone who'd learned to write before computers made the skill obsolete. Chief Brennan, I'm back at Fort Campbell now, still recovering but getting stronger every day. The docs say I'll be cleared for duty in 3 weeks. I've submitted my paperwork for reclassification. Moving from combat arms to food service specialist. My mom thinks I'm crazy, says I didn't join the Army to be a cook. But I know what I'm doing. I saw what Pops did, saw how feeding warriors and taking care of them was just as important as fighting, maybe more important. Because fighters need someone to take care of them, someone to make sure they're fed and rested and ready. That's going to be me. That's going to be my mission. I wanted to thank you for everything you did, for keeping me alive when I should have died, for showing me what real leadership looks like, for giving me a chance to become more than I thought I could be. Pop says you're the best operator he's ever seen. I believe him. I saw you fight, saw you lead, saw you make impossible decisions and somehow make them work. That's what I want to be. Not a fighter, but a leader. Someone people trust to make the right calls when the situation goes sideways. Thank you for the example. Thank you for the lesson. Thank you for everything. Respectfully, Private First Class Tommy Castellano, United States Army. Sarah filed that letter with Frank's. Legacy documented through handwritten words from people who'd been changed by 37 minutes of violence and leadership. This was what mattered. Not medals, not official commendations, but human connection. Lives saved, lessons taught, the passing of knowledge and commitment from one generation to the next. On day 30, she received orders. Report to Naval Special Warfare Command. Full debrief. New assignment pending. The cycle continuing. The war continuing. The mission continuing because it always continued and probably always would. She reported wearing dress blues, official uniform for official meetings, the kind of pageantry the military required even when everyone involved would rather be wearing comfortable clothes and skipping the formality. Commander Hayes was there, so was a captain Sarah didn't recognize, and a rear admiral, stars on his collar. The kind of rank that meant policy decisions and strategic planning rather than tactical operations. Chief Brennan, please sit. She sat. The admiral studied her with the kind of assessment senior officers used when deciding whether someone was worth investing in or should be pushed aside. I've read your after-action reports, all of them. Kandahar 2011, Iraq 2015, Syria 2018, Afghanistan 2023. You have a pattern, Chief. Every time you're put in impossible situations, you somehow make them work. Sometimes through tactics, sometimes through leadership, sometimes through sheer force of will. The results are consistent. Mission success, personnel survival, objectives achieved, objectives. Thank you, sir. I'm not complimenting you, I'm assessing you. There's a difference. The admiral leaned forward. We're creating a new position, Special Operations Liaison to Indigenous Forces Training Programs. Someone who can assess foreign military capabilities, identify potential partners, train them to our standards. The kind of work that requires tactical competence and cultural awareness and the ability to lead people who aren't Americans and don't think like Americans. Sarah processed this. Not another deployment to Afghanistan or Iraq or any of the places Americans had been fighting for decades. Something different, something that required different skills, something that might actually make a difference instead of being another finger in a dam that was already broken. You want me to train foreign militaries? I want you to identify which foreign militaries are worth training, which partners will actually fight when we need them, which ones will fold the minute we leave. You have the experience, you have the judgment, you have the track record of making impossible things possible. That's what this job requires. And if I decline, you won't, because you know this is where you can do the most good, where your skills matter most, where the mission is building something instead of just breaking things. The admiral stood. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, we assign someone else, and you go back to direct action missions that will probably get you killed within 5 years. Your choice." He left. Hayes stayed. The captain Sarah didn't recognize finally spoke. "I'm Captain Elizabeth Morrison. I'll be your direct supervisor if you accept this position. I've worked indigenous force training for 15 years. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Philippines. I know what works. I know what doesn't. I need someone with your tactical background to help me separate partners worth investing in from ones who'll take our training and equipment and disappear the minute things get difficult." "Why me specifically?" "Because you kept 200 support personnel alive against 60 professional contractors. Because you made warriors out of cooks and clerks. Because you have the rare ability to see potential in people who don't see it in themselves." Morrison pulled out a file. "FOB Mongoose, 14 wounded, 0 killed. Against those odds, that shouldn't have been possible. But you made it possible. That's the skill we need, making impossible things possible." Sarah took the file. Read through it. Mission parameters, training objectives, assessment criteria, the kind of work that happened in the shadows, that never made headlines, that determined whether American partnerships succeeded or failed based on whether the right people were trained the right way. "When do I start?" 60 days. After you finish terminal leave and complete transition training. We'll send you to language school, cultural awareness courses, all the preparation that turns tactical operators into strategic assets. Sarah accepted, signed paperwork, committed to a new path, a new mission, a new way of serving that didn't involve direct action and door kicking and the kind of combat that got people killed. She left the headquarters building thinking about Frank, about Tommy, about all the warriors who'd found new ways to serve when old ways stopped working, about adaptation and evolution and the recognition that fighting wasn't the only form of service that mattered. 6 months later, she stood at Arlington National Cemetery. Not for a funeral, not for a memorial, but for a ceremony. Frank Mahoney was receiving his Bronze Star with Valor device. The Army had finally processed the paperwork, had finally recognized what he'd done, had finally given official acknowledgement to a warrior who'd served for 50 years and never asked for recognition. Frank stood at attention, 68 years old, ramrod straight, wearing his dress uniform with the combat infantryman badge he'd earned in Vietnam and all the other decorations he'd accumulated over 5 decades. The general pinning the medal spoke words about courage and leadership and extraordinary heroism. Frank stood silent, accepting recognition he'd never sought but had absolutely earned. After the ceremony, Sarah found him. He looked different, healthier. The weight he'd carried for 50 years was lighter now. Not gone, never gone, but manageable. "Congratulations, Sergeant Major." "Just Frank. I'm retired, remember?" But he was smiling, genuine warmth rather than the gruff exterior he'd maintained at FOB Mongoose. "Montana's treating me well. I'm sleeping, eating, existing without constantly waiting for the next attack. It's strange, but good. I got your letter. Figured you would, wanted you to know I'm okay. That getting it right mattered. That having a chance to save the kid instead of bury him made the last 50 years worth carrying." Frank looked at the rows of white headstones. "This place, Arlington, it's where warriors rest when the watch ends. I'll be here someday, but not yet. I've got more living to do first." Tommy Castellano appeared, also in dress uniform, his shoulder fully healed, his bearing showing the transformation from scared private to confident soldier. He'd completed his reclassification training, was assigned to Fort Benning running food service operations for Ranger School, taking care of warriors in training the way Frank had taken care of warriors in combat. "Pops, Chief, good to see you both." They stood together, 3 generations of warriors. Frank representing Vietnam and the hard lessons learned in jungles 50 years ago. Sarah representing the post-9/11 wars and the long fight against enemies who didn't wear uniforms and didn't respect conventions. Tommy representing the future, the next generation learning from those who came before. "The watch continues," Frank said quietly. "It always continues. That's what makes us different. We don't quit. We don't surrender. We stand our ground even when standing means dying. That's what warriors do. That's what we've always done. That's what the next generation will do when we're gone." Sarah looked at the cemetery, at the endless rows of white markers, at the physical manifestation of service and sacrifice, at the price paid by generations of Americans who'd stood watch when others couldn't or wouldn't. The watch never ends, she agreed. It just passes to new hands, new warriors, new generations willing to carry the weight we carried, willing to make the sacrifices we made, willing to stand when standing costs everything. Tommy spoke up. I'll carry it when you're both gone, when it's my generation's turn. I'll remember what you taught me, that taking care of people matters as much as fighting, that leadership means making impossible choices, that courage comes in many forms. I'll remember. I'll teach others. I'll make sure the watch continues. That was legacy. That was what mattered when medals were filed away and after action reports were forgotten and official histories moved on to newer wars and different heroes. The knowledge that what you taught mattered, that who you influenced carried it forward, that the watch continued because each generation taught the next what it meant to serve. The three warriors stood together in the autumn sunlight, the living honoring the dead, the present acknowledging the past, the future promising to remember the lessons that came before. Frank broke the silence. I'm proud of both of you, proud of what you've become, proud of what you'll do. The watch is in good hands. They talked for another hour, sharing stories, remembering battles, planning futures that might actually happen if wars allowed and fate was kind. Then they separated, each returning to their own path, each carrying the weight of service in their own way. Sarah returned to her new assignment, training indigenous forces, building partnerships, creating capabilities that would last beyond American presence. It was different work, harder in some ways, less immediately satisfying than direct action, but potentially more impactful. The kind of work that built foundations rather than just fighting fires. She thought often about a full mongoose. About 37 minutes, that changed everything. About the people she'd led and the lessons she'd learned, and the warrior who'd taught her that leadership was about taking care of people rather than completing missions. Frank's words stayed with her. Take care of your people. Everything else is secondary. That became her philosophy, her approach, her reason for serving. Not tactics or strategy or mission success, but people. The warriors who trusted her, the partners who depended on her, the next generation learning what it meant to stand watch. Years later, when she'd retired and the wars had finally ended or changed into something different, she would return to Arlington, would stand at Frank Mahoney's grave, would tell him about the warriors she'd trained and the partnerships she'd built, and the legacy that continued because he taught her what mattered. But that was future. That was distant. For now, she had work to do, people to train, partners to assess, a watch to keep, because the watch never ended. It just passed to new hands willing to carry it forward. And somewhere in Montana, an old warrior sat on his porch watching mountains and knowing he'd done what he'd come to do. He'd stood watch. He'd protected his people. He'd passed the knowledge forward. That was enough. That was everything. That was what it meant to serve. End.